August Cion Corla. Minister, first I want to welcome that we're having this debate. It's very badly needed. The failure, again, to ensure that special education opened this week caused immense anger, heartbreak and frustration. Certainly for staff, for stakeholders, for the department, for you, I'm sure, but most of all, for the children affected and for their families. For at least the second, if not the third time since Christmas, a desperately wished-for return to school was dashed. Many children will have been waiting for a bus or a lift that did not come today. So we must remember who is at the heart of this. These are the children who, as we all know, were among the greatest losers during the first lockdown. Educationally and socially, the disruption to routine, the lack of social contact, the frustration, it was unbearable for many and for their families. And that's despite the best efforts of everyone, from staff, parents and children. But the reality is that remote learning for these children is not equal and in some instances is near impossible. Minister, I know you wanted them in school. As you well know, so did we. I don't know a single TD who objected to the principle, and I, among others, wanted it as soon as could be agreed. You finished your speech yourself speaking about a shared objective. The criticism here is not about the objective. We can all have a shared objective and different ways of achieving it. We have a similar objective, I'm sure, across this House to solve the housing crisis, but many different ways about how we must achieve it. There is a huge gap between having an objective and an agreed plan to deliver something. It is delivery, and that is where the department has fallen down. And Minister, I know you have criticisms of others, but I think that you and the Minister of State and the department should consider your own roles and your own responsibility in this debacle. There are no winners. There are no winners and we must solve it. But I think there should be some reflection on responsibility here as well. In the first instance, I cannot get over the fact that there was never a plan B for the education system if the schools had to close overall. I agreed with the objective of trying to ensure schools could remain open as long as possible. It's the best way of learning. I look forward to them being open again. But this government made it their Alamo that there could never be a plan B, because how could the schools possibly close? And for that reason, there seemed to be no plan B. There seemed to be no consideration given to, well, if schools have to close, well then here's how we continue education and here's our priorities. Here's who we try and keep in school buildings. The fact that that wasn't there led to the mistakes of the last few weeks, that there wasn't a plan for the first occasion when a proposal was rolled out with scarcely any consultation, and then this week when a proposal that was consulted upon to an extent but not agreed, and that is the crucial element of this. That is where the origins are. In my view, there was a rush to deliver good news I was glad to see, but that rush upended the entire process twice. There may be a temptation to let this drift. That cannot happen. I am encouraged to hear that discussions are continuing, but that has to continue on an intensive basis. I appreciate there are lingering tensions between the Minister of State and the unions, but nobody expects them to be best friends. We want them to work together and to get a result for these children. I note some of the last-minute commitments made by the Minister yesterday. It's frustrating that some of these commitments seem to have been made when the die was more or less cast and when the jig was up, given many of these issues and these assurances have been flagged since August by myself, among others, including the stakeholders, but others in this House as well. If the government is sincere in their efforts, then these commitments have to remain on the table, and there has to be solutions found for other outstanding issues, including flexibility for at-risk staff, serial testing for staff, reversing the incredible 40% cut in PPE grant and sanitising, and the extension of supply panels. This has been done elsewhere. It can be done here. But we need to change of approach from the ministers and indeed the Taoiseach, who does need to be part of this process. And it needs to be agreed before it's announced. Minister, I'll move on to just some questions. Minister, one of the key concerns in schools is ensuring that where a case arises, that public health approach to it is decisive, immediate and comprehensive. One of the issues being raised with you relates to serial testing. Will you ensure that school staff will have access to serial testing? And I just want to make a brief point as well on the public health guidance. I think we need to be careful in our language here, because I think one of the points of frustration is that people feel as if they're not being treated as adults when we talk about schools being safe. It has never been the case from the public health advice that schools are absolutely safe. Schools are relatively safe. And it is important that they remain open with the right safeguards because of their importance. But there is never any suggestion that they are absolutely safe, that they are without risk. That risk has to be minimised. And that's what these discussions should be about, is minimising these risks and protecting people. But we also must treat school staff with the respect they deserve, and that they understand that, and that's the way that the communication should be. Acknowledge the risks that are there and put in place the measures to minimise that risk because of the importance of education. So, Minister, my question there was in relation to serial testing. Can you provide that? The other question is the point in relation to vaccination, which I'm sure has been raised with you many times. I want to ask you, has your department contacted the National Immunisation Advisory Committee to request an increased priority for vaccination? Have you made that ask on behalf of the people who work for you? Minister, my final question relates to a major concern of mine. I am concerned that the issue of special education will be rolled into the overall process of reopening schools. I believe that would be a profound mistake. It can be considered in conjunction with it, but reopening special education must be an objective in and of itself. We all want to see schools open as soon as possible. Schools are the best place to learn, best place for children to be. But we all know that can't be guaranteed on February 1st. If it's possible to do it, then great. But if a decision is made that the return to school isn't possible until mid or late February, until the 22nd or whatever it could be, potentially, and I'm not prejudging that, but it's a possibility, it would be a profound tragedy if children with special educational needs are left behind yet again. They must be a first priority for a return, and it should not be contingent on the overall reopening of schools. So, Minister, can you commit that the return of special education will not be contingent on the overall return to school buildings? Thank you.
Minister.
And thank you, Deputy. In the first instance, just to reference some of the points that you have raised here, and the reference to there not being plans A, B, C and D, can I tell you, Deputy, that there has been, since June...
I understand that the Minister's desire to respond, which he has issued press releases. There's 3 minutes. There were 3 specific questions.
And if you allow me, Deputy, I will answer the questions.
Respond, please.
But the Deputy has made an assertion that there was no planning here. There have been considerable plans put in place, all of them, A, B and C, and all of the plans that we have, backed to follow public health advice. As public health advice dictates, we would follow the plans as available. And there has been no ambiguity there. Plan A, on foot of public health advice, was to reopen our schools, which we did successfully from September to December. Plan B, if that were not possible, considerable planning was put in terms of guidance and adjudication for schools as to how to manage remote teaching and learning. And again, that was agreed guidance after considerable engagements with all of the unions and the stakeholders, and that guidance has admitted. And indeed, Plan C, in terms of a return to school, if there was to be a partial return, that priority here, as I say, has been given to the core group that you mentioned, children with additional needs. Can I make reference to this 40% cut that you and others in your party have quite liberally made reference to? There is no 40% cut in terms of PPE. The difference in monies being made available in this term are as follows.
The Minister is talking down the clock.
In the first term, I am not. In the first term, this is very important because you, your leader and many others have made assertions in relation to this, and it is important to correct the record. In the instance of PPE, in the first term, there was considerable additional funding made available for start-up costs. Start-up costs that included putting in place hand sanitizer equipment in places,
I'm aware of the facts. I disagree.
And all of that.
Can you answer the questions?
So, if you allow me to finish,
please.
and equally so, the first term was 25% longer than the present term. So there is absolutely no cut. I refute that absolutely 100%. The provision in terms of PPE is as it should be, and we have always said if there was more required, it would be given. Can I, in relation to serial testing, again, on foot of public health recommendation, if that is what is required, we will follow public health advice. In relation to vaccination, yes, we did make representation that our school communities would be part of that, and we have made further representation, and there is discussion in relation to it. And finally, can I just say to you, in terms of there was no consultation and that there was a rushed plan in relation to Thursday, can I say to you that was on foot of intensive discussion and negotiation. It was also as a result of agreement at the stakeholder meeting. And could I say to you in relation to that, to illustrate that it was a shared objective, this day last week, the INTO, John Boyle, said, "I believe that every single school in Ireland will be opening their doors late next week for children with additional needs." It was a shared objective. There was nothing rushed about it.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Aodhán Riordan, please. Please.
Your final question, of course, priority is being given to children with additional needs.